So open your Bibles to Luke chapter 1. And in Luke chapter 1, we pick up a second song. So last week I told you in this Christmas month, we're going to look at the four songs. There's four songs that are sung in Luke chapter 1 and Luke chapter 2. We have Elizabeth's song that we looked at last week. We have Zachariah's song that we're going to look at today. We have Mary's song, and then we have the song that the angels sang. And we're going to go through those four songs. But today I want to look at Zachariah's song, and I'll read it in just a minute. Because in his song, he tells the story of a Savior, the story of Jesus Christ. Now, here's the thing about stories. They say that stories teach us practically everything we know. And obviously, where I'm going to end up this morning is I want to end by asking you the question, what kind of story are you living? I have this key idea on the screen this morning, and I want you to take this thought home with you. Stories are incredibly powerful. We learn much of what we know from stories, and we have been chosen by God to be storytellers with our lives. Have you ever noticed that some stories move you? Have you ever watched someone's life and thought to yourself, I want to live their story. I want to live their life. Stories have the power to move us and to shape us and to transform us. Now, here's the thing with stories. Stories, I said a moment ago, teach us practically everything we know, but we don't break down and analyze stories, do we? For example, Star Wars comes out, I don't even know what it's called, but Revenge of the Sith, something like that, comes out in 2 weeks. I got it wrong. It doesn't matter. And so let's say you take your kids and you go as a family, and then you get home and you say, okay, everyone, sit down in the living room, and we're going to talk about what you learned tonight. You know, your kids would just think you're weird. You're already weird, but now they would know you're weird because no one does that. No one says, let's break down the movie. The bad guy wears black. You don't do that. If someone's telling you a story about something that happened in their life, you don't say to them, hey, hang on a minute, what's your point of the story? What are you trying to teach me? We don't do that because stories have their own power. The narrative has power. And when you talk about stories, people say this, that possibly the greatest story ever told is Jesus' story. And if you think about the narrative arc of the Bible, it's story after story after story. You have the story of creation, the story of the garden. You have the story of slaves escaping from a bad Pharaoh. You have the story of a man named Daniel trapped in a den with lions. You have the story of David, a young guy fighting Goliath. And then you have the story of Jesus, the greatest story ever told. We say that because there's something very transformational about Jesus' story. And so I want to start with the story that Zachariah tells through a song in Luke chapter 1. Now, Zachariah, we started here last week. Zachariah had been, an angel met with Zachariah. This is Elizabeth's husband. Elizabeth is Mary's cousin, so just so you get the full picture. And so this angel appears to Zachariah and says, you're going to have a son named John. And Zachariah says, how is this going to happen? I'm really old. And he doubts him. So the angel says, okay, you're going to lose your voice for the next 9 months. By the way, I'm sorry my voice is breaking. I haven't spoken for 3 days. My wife says it's the most peaceful day she's had in 25 years of marriage. But I lost my voice 3 days ago. Caught something earlier this week. So I'm going to try to get through. I'm sorry that it's breaking up. But anyway, I could empathize with Zachariah. Don't ever teach about someone who loses their voice because then it happens to you and it's the worst 3 days ever and people think you're rude and it's frustrating. Okay, Luke 1:68. So this is his song that's been sung for centuries. Praise be to God, the God of Israel, because he has come and redeemed his people. He has raised up a horn of salvation for us in the house of his servant David, as he said through his holy prophets long ago. Salvation from our enemies and from the hand of all who hate us, to show us mercy and for us to remember his holy covenant, the oath he swore to our father Abraham, to rescue us from the hand of our enemies and to enable us to serve him without fear in holiness and righteousness before him all our days. And you, my child, and I'm going to pause here because most of this song is about the coming Messiah, Jesus. Verse 76 and 77 are about his own son, John. So now he switches the song and he talks about John. And you, my child, will be called a prophet of the Most High, and you will go on before the Lord to prepare the way for him, to give his people the knowledge of salvation through the forgiveness of their sins, because the tender mercy of God by which the rising sun will come to us from heaven to shine on those living in darkness and the shadow of death, to guide our feet into the path of peace. Shalom. So do you see how Zechariah, through this song, tells the story of Jesus? Now here's the interesting thing about the story of Jesus. He tells it in one short song. And like I said, the story of Jesus is often referred to as the greatest story ever told. Do you know one of the reasons why? Not, yes, because he came as salvation for all of us, and as Zechariah says, but because the story of Jesus contains all the elements that you need to write a great story. See, in writing, if you're a writer, or if you've wanted to be a writer, or you are a film buff, you know that there are certain elements that must be present in a story for it to work. There's a science to it. There's a bit of a formula. And so this morning, I want to look at the four elements that make a story epic and great. And the first one, and how we see all of them in the life of Jesus, and then where I'm going with that is we want to see them in your life. Okay, so the first element of the best stories will always be that there is a protagonist. A protagonist is the lead character. Could be a woman, could be a man. But the protagonist is someone who the audience, who you root for and love. So this could be in a book, this could be in a movie, this could be in an oral story that you're telling. But great stories have a protagonist who people root for and love. There's two critical qualities that make us root for and love someone. The first is that character must be good. So here's what Zechariah says about Jesus in Luke 1:68. Praise be to the God of Israel, because he has come and he's redeemed us. So Jesus has come to do something good. And Mary, his mother, says this: he has filled the hungry with good things. And she has a whole long list, by the way, of all the good things. So Jesus, when he comes to do so much good. He heals, of course, people. He heals the sick. He gives dignity to people, the lowest. He comes along and he says, the least will be the greatest in my kingdom. He confronted the religious bullies. And then, of course, he gives salvation to all. So we see that quality in Jesus. Okay, if you've seen the movie, let's say any Rocky movie, including Creed that just came out, can I see your hand? Everyone that's seen any of the Rocky movies. All right. Now, you may have watched all 8 or 9 of them. I don't know how many there are. But I still think, and I did see Creed, I still think the greatest of the Rocky movies is Rocky, the original Rocky movie. So if you've seen that movie, you know that the character, Sylvester Stallone, Rocky, for the first 45 minutes of the story, he's doing one good thing after another. He changes a light bulb for a single mom. He gives food to a man who's hungry and homeless. He starts to mentor the single mom's son. He goes and finds the ugliest dog you can find and gives it to the boy with a big red bow around his neck. So are you watching a boxing movie, or are you watching a movie about Mother Teresa? You know, which one is it? Because he's the nicest boxer you've ever met. Do you know why? For 45 minutes, they set up his character. Do you know why? Because the writer wants you to root for him. Because at the end of the movie, when he's fighting Apollo Creed, who are you rooting for? Are you rooting for Apollo? No, you want Rocky to win because he's good. And I say that because not only was Jesus Christ good, but those qualities are meant to be seen in your life. I said there's 2 qualities that make us root for a protagonist and love a protagonist. One, they are good. The second thing, they are humble. They say that writers of scripts or of books or any kind of writers, you have to be very careful with your protagonist, because if you are careless with your protagonist, with the lead character, people stop liking them. You know that happens. And so you have to keep your character humble. Listen to this. If the audience or the reader thinks that the protagonist believes they are better than other people, they quit liking them. And so when we look at the life of Jesus, here's what Isaiah said before he was even born. He was despised and rejected by others. He was held in the lowest esteem. And then when Jesus gets here, he says things like, "Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth." A hero can have a lot of faults in a story or in a film, but a hero cannot be prideful. So going back to Rocky, when Rocky fights Apollo Creed, for some reason, we don't like Apollo Creed at all. Why is that? Was he a bad man? No. Did he do bad things? No. He was arrogant and prideful. And the writer of the script knows that if he's arrogant and prideful, we stop liking him. And there's such a deep life lesson for all of us there as we look at that. So here's a second element of a great story is that the lead character, and in your life the lead character is you, must have ambition for something great. The lead character must have this great ambition. So here's what Zechariah, going back to our song, Zechariah says this in chapter 1, verse 68. Praise be to the Lord. Verse 69, he has raised up a horn of salvation. Salvation from our enemies and from the hand of all who hate us. Verse 72, to show us mercy. 74, and to rescue us from the hand of our enemies. Lead characters in all great stories have a dream, have a quest, have ambition. And I want you to think deeply about this. What you want in life matters, because what you want in life dictates your story. I'm going to say that again, because it's maybe the most important thing that I say today. What you want in life matters, because what you want in life dictates the story of your life. And so if you are very careless with the things that you want, or if you don't want much at all, then there's not much story. We don't watch stories about characters that aren't after anything. Every character in all great epic stories must go after something. Let's say you decided, or let's say you have a friend. Let's say you have a friend, his name is Joe. And Joe wants one thing in life. Do you know what that is? It's a ski nautique boat that he can wakeboard behind it. And he wants that ski nautique boat more than anything else in life. And so you decide, you're enthralled by it, and so you decide to make a movie about Joe's life. And you follow him for a year, and for a year, he only eats Hot Pockets. And he saves all his money. He gets a second job and a third job, and he's saving up. And you're making this movie, and then you film the closing scene. He's on Tempe Town Lake, and the sun is setting, and he's in a ski nautique boat going as fast as he can into the sunset. Now, here's the thing. Let me ask you, at the end of this movie, are you crying? Are you thinking to yourself, I could be Joe? I want to be Joe? Or are you thinking, that's a big waste of a year. That was a whole year of his life. And then he realizes, he thinks that he can go all the way to the Gulf of Mexico on Tempe Town Lake. Then he realizes there's just pontoons at both ends. It's not really a lake or a river or anything. It's just a muddy body of water. But you're not inspired. You don't follow stories that are not interesting. But when Liam, how do you say his last name? Liam Neeson flies to Paris and rescues his daughter. I'm just speaking to the men here. Every guy here wants to be Liam Neeson. You know, maybe the women too. I don't know. But I know every guy wants to be that guy going to rescue that girl. Because there's something in us that has to have quest. There's something in us that wants to climb a mountain. Great quest, great lives involve risk. Great lives involve ambition, a quest for something good, something that you're doing for God. The best stories, if you think about it, that you hear from other people, the best stories that you read, the best stories in film, often, always, almost always involve someone almost losing their life. It involves risk. Let me see the hands of everyone here who's ever rode a Sea-Doo. okay? Everyone who's ever rode some kind of Sea-Doo. We're not talking about ski natiques. Nobody's judging you. It's okay. And so we're talking about Malawi. I'm in Malawi, on Lake Malawi. And riding a Sea-Doo on Canyon Lake or Tempe Town Lake, I don't know if you can even do that. That's kind of awesome. Riding a Sea-Doo, so there's guys riding Sea-Doos on Lake Malawi. That seems even more awesome. But then a guy pulls up on the beach, and I go over to talk to him because he looks very interesting. He's wearing a cowboy hat, doesn't have a shirt on, has a big gold chain with a tiger's claw on it. And just picture that guy, okay? And plus, he's from the Czech Republic. And so I said, hey, how fast is your Sea-Doo? Because he had come flying in. He says, I can do like 65 on this thing. I said, really? It has a huge engine. And then I look at it, he has this giant crack on the hull. And it's been fixed. I said, what happened to the hull of your Sea-Doo? He says, I'm a hunting guide. And he says, I put clients on the back of my Sea-Doo, and we go down the Sherry River at 65 miles an hour looking for crocodiles to shoot. And I said, and? He says, well, I'm flying down, and it's dark. We're doing this at night, and all of a sudden a hippo came up out of the water, and it came up right in front of me. True story. He says, I slammed into his head, split the hole, threw me and my client with our guns into the water, and he said, I thought we were going to die. The Sherry River is full of crocs and hippos eat people. He says, it was all we could do to get out to the shore. I said, did your client want his money back? And he said, no. He said it was the best day of his life. Do you know why it's the best day of his life? Because he almost died. And sometimes we live stories that don't have anything to tell. If I ask you the story of your life, what would it look like today? No one writes stories about safe people. No movies are made about the guy that invented cabinet door locks. No one's made a movie about the guy who made the clapper. No, we just don't do those things. But we write stories about people who are on a quest for something great and good with their lives. Here's a third element of all great stories is there will be trouble. Sometimes we think we don't want hard times, but conflict, adversity, trouble make a story great. So when Jesus was born, what do we read in Luke chapter 1, verse 69? He was raised up, or God has raised up a horn of salvation from our enemies and from the hand of all who hate us. So there were opponents to Jesus' quest, to his mission in life. In John chapter 16, Jesus says, this world will have trouble, but don't worry about it. I've overcome the trouble. Every story, if you think about it, needs hard times. If a story does not have conflict or adversity, the story doesn't work. It doesn't become great. For example, the helicopter crashes in Mogadishu. The Martian is left on Mars. The 8-year-old boy is left home alone while his parents go to Paris at Christmas time. Those are hard times, and it makes the story work because great characters and epic stories overcome adversity. A baby is born in a stable, not even in a motel room. An evil king tries to kill this baby at age 2. The devil tempts him for 40 days, and he's hungry, he hasn't eaten. Religious zealots try to push him off a cliff. They try to kill him and put him in a cave, but he comes back to life. If there are no hard times, think about this with me. If there are no hard times in a story or in your life or in someone else's life story, there is no change. Hard times create change in our lives. We try to avoid them, but we need them for change. Do you know what doesn't create change in our lives? An easy life does not create change. Happiness is great and joy, but it doesn't create change in our lives. Entertainment and leisure and pleasure are fantastic, but they don't create change in our lives. Adversity and overcoming adversity creates change in our lives. Don Miller is one of my favorite writers in the world, and he holds a conference in cities around the country called the Storyline Conference. And one of the exercises he invites people at the conference to do is to create a timeline, a storyline of their life. So if you look on the back of your bulletin, and don't start plotting your life story right now, but there's a line for you to fill in. If you're, let's say, 30-ish, 40-ish, and we all think we're somewhere near those ages, somewhere there, you've had 12 to 15 turns, major turns in your life, positive turns or negative turns. In story writing, they're called turns. They're narrative turns. It's a turn for the good or a turn for the worse. Stories, we think we only want the positive turns, but the story doesn't work without the negative turns. I have a timeline that I just kind of created. It might work, it may not work, of Jesus's life, and he's born in a manger. By the way, I can't even read that from here, so we're just going to guess what's up there. But you see the negative turns are on the bottom. This is to help you do yours, and then the positive turns go up. But he flees to Egypt with his family at age 2. He ends up in the desert for 40 years. That's a negative turn. But then he meets some friends on the beach. That's a positive turn. And then he feeds 5,000 people, and that's another positive turn. He heals people, and those are all great turns. People did try to push him off a cliff. That was a negative turn. I have a big downturn when they actually killed him, but then there's a bigger upturn when he rises from the dead. That's a pretty big upturn in your life story. So, and Don Miller says put a scale at 1 to 10 on either side, and then here's what you see. You see several things happen when you plot your story. First of all, you see that the bad times, the hard times, don't last forever. You see that you grew and something good happened often in your life story because of the hard times. You also see that in general, there's this great art to your life story, and God is taking you somewhere for a purpose. And then you start to see that maybe his divine hand is on your story and the story of your life. Here's a fourth element of all great stories, and it's that there's resolution to the conflict. In Jesus' story, Zechariah says this in verse 78, "The rising sun will come to us from heaven to shine on those living in darkness and in the shadow of death, to guide our feet into the path of peace." So, of course, we see the story in Zechariah's short song of Jesus' death, but then his resurrection and life. It doesn't get any more dramatic in a story when the lead character dies and then comes back to life. That's maybe the best kind of resolution you can have. But here's the key to resolution in all of our lives, is that there must be change. There must be change in the protagonist or the lead character's life. If there's no change, then the story has no ending. And a story doesn't have to always have a positive ending. We call stories with negative ending tragedies. You don't want to live a tragedy. You want to live something much better than that. But I said that great stories are narratives that transform someone's life. Someone changes in a dramatic way. Maybe you saw Clint Eastwood in Gran Torino. You see the change over the arc of the story in his life. We start with an old, grumpy guy who's somewhat of a bigot, and he's just mad and cranky at the world, won't even speak to his neighbors. And then one of his neighbor's boys gets to know him, and he starts to mentor him, and he starts to care about him. And then what does Clint do at the end? He gives his life for this guy. The best stories are when someone gives their life for someone else. And of course, that's a story of Jesus Christ. So I share these 4 elements of all great stories to get here this morning, to say that God has put you on this earth to live a story, an epic story with your life. And we are all meant to be storytellers with our lives. And so, of course, the question is, what kind of story is your life telling? By God's design, you're the principal character. You're the protagonist of your own story. And if I ask you today, hey, could you write down for me what's happening in your life? And so let's say you sat down and you wrote down everything that happened yesterday or let's say this happened Friday, got the kids off to school, came back and checked my Facebook status and updated my fantasy football scores, microwaved a Hot Pocket, and that by then the day's over. And if your story's going like that, it's not that it's a bad story or an evil story, it's just a boring story. It's a story about not very much at all. And your life is meant to be much more powerful than that. And so I want to go back to those 4 elements and put them up quickly, one at a time. How do you actually live a page turner with your life? It starts with you being the lead character of your life who people root for and love. It starts with you being that good person. It starts with you being generous and humble and giving. I think that's where all great stories start. And then the second thing is you have to begin discovering what in the world God put you on earth for. What does God really want you to do with your life? Can you say with confidence, I know God put me on earth to do this? And do you know what happens in all great epics? You have to leave. You have to leave your place of comfort. You have to actually leave your home. The Hobbit leaves the hamlet. There is no story until the Hobbit leaves the hamlet. Jesus would meet people, we read this in Luke chapter 9, along the road, and they say, hey, we want to come with you. And he says, well, let's go. And they say, well, I can't leave home yet. If you don't leave, there is no story. And then I'll say this, that most people, I think Christians even, are not living bad stories. Most people are not living evil stories. It's just that we're not living great stories. There's a principle in storytelling that the character is what they do. The character is not what they think about. The character is not about an emotion, but the character is shaped, whether it's a film or a story or a book, by what they do. And so I hope you see this morning is that God has put you here to do something great with your life. And maybe it starts with something very simple this morning. Maybe it starts by you coming and, yes, we need to build an orphanage. It's $40,000. And I think we can do that in one morning, but we need $40,000 this morning. And maybe it starts with you giving. And then maybe that story continues by you getting on a plane in March with Paul Gunther and Jeff Delp and flying to Haiti, and then you get to meet the kids who are moving into the orphanage we're building. You get to hang doors and paint walls. Maybe it starts by sponsoring an African Bible college student. We have 100 profiles here, and you start sponsoring them every month. But the story doesn't end there. And then the story continues in June when you get on the plane again with me and Paul and others, about 100 others from the Grove, and you go there and you meet the student that you're sponsoring. And then you travel to their home village and you sleep in their hut and you eat in Sema. And you don't like it at all, but you eat it anyway because you're not going to be rude. Maybe you do that. Or maybe you travel to Liberia with me in March. I'm going in March again. We have 10,000 pairs of shoes at the port. And I need to distribute these shoes, 10,000 shoes, all over the country. And so we're going to put people on dirt bikes. I only have about 5 dirt bike riders right now, and I need a lot more. And maybe you're thinking that if you go with Palmer, you're going to crash the motorbike. That's possible. We took one guy, and he crashed 5 times the first day. And I'm not kidding, when he got back, I said, I thought you knew how to ride a motorbike. He says, no, this is my first time. And I said, and maybe you think I might get malaria. We have had people come back with us and end up at Mercy Gilbert with malaria. But that's okay, because if you're at Mercy Gilbert with malaria, you're the most awesome patient in the hospital. People are coming from every department. You're the patient with the exotic disease. And people are asking, where have you been? They want to hear your story. You're in Africa giving away shoes on dirt bikes? What are you thinking? And so my challenge is begin doing, not just thinking about or talking about the things that God put you on earth to do. And then the next thing is overcome adversity. Maybe you have a dozen different excuses why you're not living or the quest, the life that God put you here to live. I hear Christians often say things like, it was not God's will. And I think they usually say that because they're afraid of something. Do you know what the best way to eliminate fear is? The best way to eliminate fear is to not do a thing. The best way to have no fear in your life is to try nothing new. And then there's no fear. But I hear Christians, and we have 150 people sign up to go to Africa this summer. And some of you who signed up, maybe you're thinking, I need to back out. Maybe it's not God's will that I go. And I've heard people say, well, God shut the door. Maybe you're thinking, well, God closed the door. And I want to say, no, God didn't shut the door. You just chickened out. That's honestly what's happening. And so I want to say this morning that if God has led you to do something with your life and you think the door is closed, great protagonists, they kick in the door. They crash through the door. They don't let the door stop them.